And it happened because of the remarkable nature of our documents of freedom. And many of those documents have the fingerprints of Thomas Jefferson all over them. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is Constitution Corner. Every show we do on this, every segment we do on Constitutional Corner, we really try to not just explain what the Constitution's about or go into depth about this or that amendment or clause. We want to give you some background that helps you understand the Constitution in its own time, because to understand the intentions, the background, the education, the worldview of the founders is to give us a much better sense of how today we might treat the Constitution, how we can be faithful to what it says as the singularly most important political set of documents ever written in the history of the world. And I want to talk about that today. Seems to me that it's an axiom with the progressive left that the more important something is to the history of the world, the more the left has to hate it if it's done by the West. The Constitution and the kinds of freedoms that it guarantees. I mean, you have something really unique in world history. The Romans had a famous republic, but the Roman Republic, on which loosely the American Republic was based, did not have anything like the freedoms and the guarantees of liberty and the protections from big government that the American Constitution has. A lot had happened between the fall of Rome, the fall of the Roman Republic in the first century BC and the creation of the American Republic in the late 18th century. A lot had happened. We'd gone through a lot of revolutions, a lot of monarchies, a lot of experiments before you got to what our founding fathers did. And again, it cannot be underestimated how important these founding doctrines are and these founding documents were to the liberty and the freedom we have today. The reason people all over the world come to America is precisely related to the opportunities and the freedoms and the liberties guaranteed by those documents. And it's just shocking to me how oftentimes many immigrants to this country understand better than American citizens do what these rights and protections mean in terms of freedom and the ability to live the life that you want. Nevertheless, despite of the genius of the Constitution, and when we think of the Constitution, as much as anybody else, in the Declaration, we think of Thomas Jefferson. Why is it that Thomas Jefferson seems to be hated by the progressives more than Washington, although Washington's coming in for it now too. And it seems like the progressive left isn't too interested in talking much about Adams or Monroe or those guys. They're not big enough founding fathers yet to target. It's the big dog that gets the target here, and that's Jefferson. His achievement in the Declaration and his role in writing the Constitution is really, really significant and important and can't be dismissed. Jefferson, although he held a lot of views that many modern Americans and many modern conservatives too might be shocked about and surprised by. Again, he was much more of a deist. People forget that Thomas Jefferson actually rewrote his own version of the Gospels. He loved the gospel message of Christ. He just didn't like the Son of God stuff. So he wrote a version of the Gospels in which the Son of God stuff wasn't there, just the teachings and the philosophy of Jesus. Nevertheless, his intellect was pretty towering. There's a great anecdote that John F. Kennedy was hosting a bunch of Nobel laureates at the White House one evening, having a big reception and dinner for some of these Nobel laureates, dozens and dozens of them, the most brilliant people alive at the time. And when Kennedy got up to give his speech, his address at the beginning of the dinner, he said, "Wow, thank you all for joining us today." He said something to the effect of, "There's never been a collection of brain power like this in the White House since Thomas Jefferson dined here alone." And that's a heck of a statement, right? That Jefferson alone had more intellectual capacity than all of those Nobel laureates in that same room at the same time. Jefferson's achievement is singular, and the reason the left hates him is two good reasons. Two good reasons to them. One, the document is a document, the Declaration and his role in the Constitution is a document that limits government. To the progressive, this is the cardinal sin. The fact that it limits government, it put restraints on government, it makes the people in charge of government, it signals that the government works for us, we don't work for it, that the individual, the local community, the individual state has supposedly the real authority and not the president and not the Congress and not the Senate. That one of the few things and few and only things the border exists for is to be protected by the federal government. Federal government has very little legal recourse, very little responsibility in the founding documents. That's by design. And ironically, one of the things that the federal government is supposed to do is defend our borders. You can understand why the progressives hate Jefferson for that. And finally, Jefferson owned slaves, as did many people in the certain parts of the colonial experiment that we were going through. Slavery was not illegal. But that's a secondary reason. Jefferson tried to free the slaves. He tried to write the slavery out of the Constitution, but there could be no agreement among all the different states if it had been accomplished. So Jefferson, who desperately wanted to free his own slaves, to use the power of government to do that would wait about 100 years for that to happen. But it happened. And it happened because of the remarkable nature of our documents of freedom. And many of those documents have the fingerprints of Thomas Jefferson all over them. It's impossible to overstate his role in the framing of this country, but he was a human being. And like all human beings, he had his dark sides and he had those places in his character where he fell short. But what didn't fall short and what will never fall short is the documents he gave us and all the founding fathers if we just adhere to them. Honor the Constitution by understanding it. This has been Liberty News. I'm Dr. Duke.